So, new topic. When we talk about our own parties, we fight. Let's talk about some other parties so we can agree. One of the clear objectives, as far as I could tell, from John Horgan in the BC election was to destroy the Green Party in British Columbia. He broke up the deal. He secured the former leader's public support for his re-election, and called the election when the Green Party's new leader had just been in place for a week, and obviously hoped to steamroll them and some collapse the left movement. Didn't happen. Green leader stood out, did well, much like you were talking about the new federal leader, and the Greens held or better their vote in British Columbia. So,
but what does that mean? They have Horgan has 50, anywhere between, depending on when the mail-in ballots come, he'll have between 53 and 57 seats, and the Greens have 3 seats and now are irrelevant. They held the balance of power in the last parliament, and now they're 3 seats. So it's, this is the problem that the Green Party has had. It had it under Elizabeth May, is that everyone always says they actually they are doing better than they fundamentally actually are. So if I'm the Greens, sure, I can make myself feel better by saying, oh, I've kept my 3 seats and my certain percentage of the vote. But at the end of the day, they're now essentially irrelevant in the BC legislature.
They're irrelevant in the legislature, but they're not irrelevant on the ground. And Horgan had the advantage of a big sweeping win in which he didn't need their votes. But when you get back to normal competitive BC politics, which is a 50-50 dogfight, he's going to want those Green votes. And that Green Party appears to be strengthening. So if you look at the federal situation...
Sorry, David, I'm going to go back. Why does he need those votes? Like, we're making the assumption he needs these votes, but why? He just
I'll tell you why. Well, it's a gift. It's a
because
gift
when the Liberals get better...
Who's to say they're going to get better? You're making all these assumptions, like, right. assumption. Who's to say the Liberals are going to get better?
I assume they will get better. Okay. Let me just say this.
You're making these assumptions, but you guys are pumping the Greens' tires when there's actually no evidence to pump their tires.
Well,
BC's always a even split between the free enterprise option and the NDP option, with the free enterprise option having a bit of an advantage, which is why they mostly win elections. So in a normal election, I would say Horgan needs the votes that went to the Green Party because he won't have the votes he took from the Liberal Party this time.
Yeah, I just think it's but I look, if you're from an institution, not for this election, not for this circumstance, but institutionally, a gift you can give your party, if you're John Horgan, a lasting gift, it'd be to get rid of the Greens, to vanquish them in this past election, because that closes off the threat that they pose down the road if circumstances do change. And yeah, so you have to assume that circumstances might change, but my experience in life is that circumstances do often change. And federally, it's all a maybe what if kind of thing. But, one of the ingredients for growing a party like the Greens is dissatisfaction with established alternatives. And I just think, we'll move into, at some point, 6, 7, 8, 9 years of Trudeau. The Conservatives will or will not broaden their base, but right now their base is too narrow. And, there might be some room to play there for the new Green leader.
Okay, but we're now going, you're talking federally and you're talking provincially.
I am.
So what are we,
because I'm taking the same dynamic.
No, because they're two different things. Like, part of the reason the Greens probably, they had profile in the BC legislature because they actually held the balance of power. Now they're going to be just a party that has 3 seats. And everybody was pumping Elizabeth May's tires. David, you included, your buddy Betty May. And they completely shit the bed in the last federal campaign. I actually think Annamie Paul she's a very compelling candidate. I think she is very good, and I think it's very good for the Greens, but I think it's a very different dynamic than what you're saying in BC. I think you are suggesting that the Liberals are going to get their act together, that the NDP is going to need the Greens, and I think those are a lot of assumptions that we don't know is actually going to happen. Horgan just won a massive majority, the first NDP BC leader to win back-to-back elections, and he's got it's a long 4-year runway.
Here's what I'm
Let's
asserting.
Let's say we were federal NDP strategists.
Yes.
Sister and brother. Sister and brother. Let's say we were NDP strategists.
It would be a fucking big call.
Let's say they let us into their tribe. Then we would be sitting back and we would be saying the Liberal Party is leaning heavily left for a Liberal Party right now. And the Green Party appears to have got a compelling new leader and maybe some new life. We are going to get squeezed here unless we do something. What would we be recommending that the NDP do to avoid that squeeze play between the Liberals moving left and the Greens growing?
So that's where I was going. I was going to the fact that I think that you can look at an abstract and say federally that the Green Party, you can see what kind of coalition they're going to want to assemble. She's a more progressive version of the party. So that threatens constituencies that right now are with the NDP, but also with Trudeau. Obviously, she can maintain some of the green credentials, the environmental issues. And I think she could be kind of exciting and interesting as a protest alternative for people that say, I'm just kind of dissatisfied. And so you put those things together, they're anxious. And so I think, if I'm the federal NDP, I'm like, let's lock up some of our traditional constituencies. So let's talk more about the environment, that kind of stuff. Do some of that stuff to protect your flank. But I think the number one thing is I would try to make myself sound more like can you believe these fucking guys? Okay. Like we're the better alternative here. Like we are the protest alternative. I think they want to make certain they set themselves up as door number 3, not door number 4. And that's where I would be. If you're pissed off with these two guys, then, I'm your place to go. And I don't think they have a huge window to reassert their possession of that option. I think that she has that in theory at a glance, she has lots of potential to take on that spot. And I think you got to defend that spot before she gets there.
Well, I think Singh has basically already ceded that ground. He's done nothing but prop the Liberals up since the last election. So
that's what makes it hard.
It's because they are so paralyzed with fear of going into an election, because just from a logistical and a monetary point of view, they actually can't afford to have one. So and even little things like yesterday in question period, he did it remotely, which I'm not, at half of Parliament, there's only 50 people, I guess, in Parliament. But if you look on Instagram, him and his wife did a photo shoot in like the forest in Brampton. So he's not in the house holding the Liberals to account. He's doing like a photo shoot in Brampton. So the fact of the matter is to me, the Liberals have already ceded that ground to the NDP. I don't think they can get that back. They can't say, if you're unhappy with the Liberals or you're unhappy with the Conservatives, we're an alternative, because they are part of the Liberal alternative. They've been literally propping them up through this whole pandemic, which is where federally, I think the Greens have a real opportunity, because I agree with you. There is going to be the protest element, and not to marry the two, but if you notice in the BC campaign, the Greens they talked about the environment a lot less than what you would think a Green Party would talk about the environment. They were more, Scott, to your point, on more, this is a protest vote. They talked about, Horgan and anti-democracy in terms of turning his back on the deal that the Greens and the NDP had, but they didn't. And in her speech, the leader's speech on Saturday night, she did talk about the environment, but at the very end, like they're trying to, if Annemie Paul takes, if there's any playbook from there, you're going to see them, to your point, turn more into a protest party and be I'm not one of these two guys. If I was the NDP, if we're sitting here as NDP strategists, I would be very worried right now, because they're going to, if things continue this way, they're going to get their lunches eaten by the Greens.
Can I throw out one specific suggestion, David? Sorry to go again, but just one very okay, what would you do? Like in the what would you do territory, if I was Singh, I would dedicate a lot of energies. This touches on one of the other questions that came up in Twitter for all of us. I would dedicate some energy right now to generating energy by getting some high profile people to be supporters of mine. So I would go to, you guys are going to laugh at this, and maybe it's destined to fail, but I would go to Abby Lewis. I go to Naomi Klein. I go to those people and I would say, you're established voices on the left. You're established voices in urban Canada. You're established voices of the NDP tradition. And so I want you on the team. I'm begging one of you to run. I want your support. If you're not going to run, then I want your high profile endorsement and involvement so I can say you're part of the team, and try to grab it. And maybe there are 3 or 4 other good suggestions. Because they wrote that, in my view, half-assed, manifesto a few years ago, that still gives them a kind of, we're the ones that are standing outside and apart from the process, and we're gonna be the voices of protest and insurgency. I would try to get that insurgency energy working for you. They've still, within their world and that crossover green NDP urban Toronto play, they've got some energy and brand value, and I would go after them. That'd be one specific recommendation I'd make.
Back to the future. I think, I'm not even dismissing that, but I think part of this,
I'm not even dismissing it. As fucking dumb as that is, I'm not even going to bother dismissing it.
No, but I think part of the problem,
you're not going to make me talk about Naomi Klein at 9 a.m.
So part of I think, part of the problem, yes. So they've got a problem with the Naomi Kleins and the Abby Lewises, the champagne socialists from downtown. I think the bigger problem they have federally is the BC and the ND and the Saskatchewan voters, the former NDP reform switchers, the NDP seats that in 1993 switched and voted for Preston Manning, and I think that's their bigger problem. Singh was in BC campaigning for Horgan, and none of his candidates, ministers, or Horgan himself wanted to be seen with Singh. So I think the bigger problem, it's not the Naomi Klein, it's the populist bent of the NDP that they have, that I think Singh has a much bigger problem with.
One of the first things
they've lost that, Jenny. They've lost that populist vote completely.
And I don't think under Jagmeet Singh they can win it back.
And one of the first things
Mike said to you, he's not the right person to do that. Let me ask you a question.
From a BC perspective, Dave, right? One of the first things that Mike said to you is that people in the BC NDP and the professionalism that is associated with that current crop feel no affinity and don't have any natural alliances with the federal party, and don't see it as their job to help them necessarily. That's a problem.
No, they represent people who work in lumber mills, the BC NDP.
Yeah.
Right. They're in a different game altogether.
Horgan is pro resource development.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know anything about Parliament, so the two of you help me out here. What would happen if the NDP found a pivot point, let's say the economic update, in which they said, we have no confidence in the government anymore, and we're going to vote non-confidence every chance we get? How would that affect the Conservatives?
Well, I think it would depend on
assuming the Conservatives don't want an election. I'm trying to think about shifting the blocks. Do you remember there was that period, Jenny? Yeah. I remember it very, very well, in the first few years of the Harper administration, where the Liberals were compelled to vote with the government or abstain, because they knew the NDP were going to vote against the government and the Liberals were afraid of an election.
It was crippling.
So how do you create that dynamic so you're not the eunuch in the story? Right now, the NDP are the eunuch in the story.
I don't think the Conservatives want an election right now, but I do not think that they will be crippled how you guys were for the first 3 years of our term.
Okay.
There's only one answer to that question. And I've thought about it too in the last little while. And the only way out of that box is to have the same courage that Trudeau had last week, if you're Jagmeet Singh. So when the next one is coming, before everybody else gets out there, before O'Toole speaks, you say, just so we're clear, if they make this thing a confidence vote, we're against it. So the pressure, don't come asking me, don't scrum me, I'm done. Go talk to the Bloc, go talk to the Conservatives, and you shift the onus. And I don't think the Conservatives, I think they would rush to the microphone to say, turns us. And so it would transfer to the Bloc. And then we'd see, like the Bloc haven't been really tested. They haven't had they haven't been made to sweat one of these decisions at all. But you can't make that call if you're Jagmeet Singh. If one, you're scared of the election. Two, your caucus will not permit you to make that threat because they don't want to go in election. And three, you're trying to spin this narrative of we're going to secure a whole series of benefits from the Liberals. That will demonstrate how we are making Parliament work, why you need the New Democrats, and therefore we will follow Jack's path to success. Except that's all horseshit. That's not what history actually told us. Jack didn't actually follow. Yeah, he put us up against a wall and pulled some stuff out of us. I'm not convinced ever. I've never been convinced that it had hardly anything to do with his later electoral success. I don't think that actually led to it. And I think the
better historical parallel, Scott, is David Lewis between 1972 and 1974.
Exactly.
Where David Lewis worked closely with the Trudeau government, the Pierre Trudeau government, got the Foreign Investment Review Agency done, got Petro-Canada created, got a massive expansion in government spending, and then were crushed in the succeeding election that elected a Liberal majority government. So that storyline that they would have had in 1974 about everything you like about this Liberal government we did had no traction then.
And Ray 85 to 87. I think that's the real lesson. But if you're weak, you got no choice. Like, you're trapped.
Yeah, the ship has sailed. Singh will either be dragged kicking and screaming into the election, or the Liberals will pull the plug on themselves in some way. Like, it is evident he doesn't want an election. And the only bullshit talking points the NDP have, and we've all been on panels with commentators in the last week, is, oh, well, Jagmeet was the adult in the room. Like, that's literally the only thing they can say with that. Because they can't even say they won anything on this. They can't even say it was a bullshit. We won sick days, which, by the way, they never actually won. It was the Liberals said, sure, I'm going to mention it as a throwaway line at the end of a conference call with the premiers, but I'm not going to compel them to do it. So they can't even say they won a fake promise from the prime minister, because Trudeau basically said, I don't give a shit. I'd rather go into an election. So the only talking point the NDP have is Jagmeet was the adult in the room, which is bullshit. And they're never going to do, Scott, what you said and go out to a mic and say, we're into this, because they logistically cannot afford. To your point, for the most part, their caucus doesn't want an election. He doesn't want an election. They have no money. They can't, even in a pandemic, no tour, Zoom town hall type of scenario, they have no money to have an election. They have mortgaged their building. They are, millions of dollars in debt. They just can't have one.
Listen, Richie Cunningham learned this lesson from Fonzie in 1974. Richie Cunningham was upset about being bullied. He said to Fonzie, you never have to do anything. You just snap your fingers and people run. Nobody tries to take you on. He says, you got to look tough. You got to present yourself differently. You got to stand up to that guy, not be weak. And then when it came time for that to happen, and Richie showed up with the leather jacket and he was tough and the rolled up denim jeans, and Fonzie said, oh, I forgot to tell you one thing. If you're going to threaten to throw the punch, you have to have thrown a punch before. And the problem that Jagmeet Singh has is, like Richie Cunningham, he's never thrown a punch and he can't throw a punch. So he's got a Richie Cunningham problem. And, people like Richie Cunningham, but they don't fear him.